Today, in a report that the Hope Center and our centers here at the School of Public Health have prepared, we're trying to understand where things stand around food insecurity now, a decade later, and what Cuny can do to make progress. The three questions we hope to discuss today is: who is food insecure at Cuny? Our focus is on students, but there is increasing concern about staff. Some of our adjunct faculty are also experiencing food insecurity, and certainly the families of our students. We want to look at the scope, reach, and impact of current Cuny initiatives to reduce food insecurity, some of their successes and limitations. And most important, we hope to enlist all of you in thinking through what Cuny can do in the coming months and years, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, to make significant progress in reducing food insecurity here at Cuny. So those are our goals. Our report, next slide please, is based on 8 sources of information that together with Hope, we have gathered over the last 2 years. And that includes surveys of representative samples of Cuny students by Healthy Cuny, a survey which all Cuny students were invited to participate by Hope Center, both of those in 2018. A scan of the food security resources on Cuny's 26 campuses that we did last semester, and campus visits by the many Cuny students working with us, and some interviews with several New York City food security organizations that are helping to serve Cuny, a survey of the food pantries that Hope Center did, and we'll be saying just a little about 2 very recent surveys, one on 5 campuses with high percentages of low-income students. This was a survey done by Maggie Dickinson at Gutman Community College to understand their experiences trying to enroll in SNAP, and a survey the Healthy Cuny group just did of all Cuny, of a sample of all Cuny undergraduates about the impact of coronavirus. So our findings are based on these 8 surveys. Our full report is available online, and if you go to the chat, you'll find the link both to the full report, which is I think about 40 pages, and to the executive summary, which is about 8 pages. And we welcome feedback. We put these reports together quickly because we wanted them to have an impact, and we're sure that you might have some corrections and additions, and we hope to hear from you. Next slide, please. So in 2018, we did a survey of a representative sample of Cuny students, and what we found was that about 14% of Cuny students said that they had often or sometimes been hungry in the last year. These results show you from that one question the most severe form of experiencing food insecurity. And it's important to distinguish between food insecurity and hunger, 2 different concepts. And you can see low-income students had a much higher rate of food insecurity than all Cuny students. And females, community college, Latinx, and African-American students had higher rates than all Cuny. In the survey that was done by the Hope Center, where they invited all Cuny students to respond, and about 20,000 students responded, they found that 35% reported high levels, 35% had high levels of food security, 16% had marginal levels. That's a United States Department of Agriculture category. They're considered food insecure, but they're in a little bit of trouble. And 20% were low and 28% very low. 48% reporting low or very low food insecurity in that survey. Next slide, please. So we compared the result on certain questions that we asked in 2018, and again, both of these representative samples of CUNY students, and we thank the Office of Institutional Research at CUNY, which has been a really important partner for both Hope Center and us in the research we're doing, and look at these striking changes. The question, were you worried that you'd run out of food before you could buy more? And in April 2020, just a month ago, 50% of CUNY students said yes, they were worried, often or sometimes. And 2 years ago, that was only 16. So a tripling of the rate measured by this question of food insecurity, a serious cause for concern here at CUNY. And the next slide, please. In the work we did for this report, we wanted to take a look at the full range of programs that CUNY and some other universities use to address food insecurity. And we were, a hopeful sign is how much CUNY is doing. And because we didn't want to look only at food pantries, an important but not the only part, is that we saw several categories of programs. And after looking at more than 30 programs, we grouped them into 5 categories shown in this slide. The first was programs that give students food or put money in their pocket so they can buy more food. Some of those are food related and some of those are not food related, like emergency loans or book subsidies or childcare subsidies. The second set of programs help students and families to better use resources. They support mental health. They provide psychological counseling. It's student organizations working on food security. The third set of programs, and Sara will talk more about the role of these programs at the national level in a minute, provide work for pay or in other ways to students. And the college's work-study programs are an important source of resources that help students or fail to help students to address food insecurity. The fourth bucket of programs was programs that connect students to benefits. Single Stop, located on the community colleges and John Jay here at CUNY, enrolls students in SNAP, in WIC, a program for young mothers and their for mothers and their young children. And programs that help homeless or precariously housed children. Those students, those are really important programs to provide important benefits for students. And finally, including some in the other categories, are programs that help CUNY as an institution to better address the basic needs of students, things like ASAP, homeless services, etc. Next slide, please. And so we were looking at these, go back one more, at these range of programs. And this is what the face of some of these programs look like. The 3 young women are at the Hostess Food Security Advocates Program. The picture on your lower right is at the Transition Academy at Medgar Evers, the Single Stop Program, and the York College Emergency Grant Fund, a really important source of support that the Petri Foundation provides on many campuses. And this shows you the different faces of food insecurity programs at CUNY. Next slide. In the work we did looking at these 8 sources of data, and in a meeting we had in, I believe it was early March, right before the COVID closing, we invited, I think it was 25 people, the staff members of Single Stop and food pantries, to join with us on saying, here are some of the strengths and here are some of the weaknesses of CUNY programs. And I'll begin with the strengths. 18 of our 25 campuses have food pantries, and every campus has some link to food services. Meal vouchers are now being given out at 3 community colleges thanks to a grant of $1 million from the City Council, and 17 other campuses have some sort of meal voucher program. 8 campuses, as I mentioned, have Single Stop. 23 campuses have emergency aid programs. And CUNY is fortunate to have a chancellor, a vice chancellor, and many other senior staff who really understand food security in a way that is stronger than I've seen in the 30 years or more I've been at Cuny, and who are really committed to doing something about it. These are among the strengths and assets we have. Next slide. But on the other hand, there are some very serious weaknesses, and that the underlying message of our session today is Cuny can do better. Many of the food pantries lack space, food, and staffing to meet the demand. Campus food services continue to be priced beyond students' ability to pay and to offer food that many students are not satisfied with around price, quality, healthfulness. The voucher program is reaching only a few hundred students. Single stop isn't offered on 17 campuses. Emergency aid, a wonderful program, but it falls far short of demand. And most important, and when you see our recommendations in 1 minute, many of the food security initiatives at Cuny are siloed, not coordinated. They put a burden on staff and students, and Cuny doesn't yet have a point person for leading and coordinating food security initiatives. Next slide. So these are our recommendations. We think it would strengthen our efforts if Cuny designated one person in the central office to be the director of food security. And we think it's worth considering whether over time that person should also take on the range of basic needs that Cuny needs to provide its students, especially in the face of COVID, to enable them to be successful academically. We think Cuny should create a university-wide task force that includes student, faculty, staff, leaders, to be charged with creating a plan that within 3 years will lead to significant reductions in food security. We think that's an achievable goal, but we need to focus on it. We think each campus should also have a task force on promoting food security, and the university-wide task force and the campus task forces should work together. We think there are wonderful resources at Cuny. We've all done some work on developing those resources, and both students as peer advocates and educators and faculty could be doing much more to mobilize their campuses. We think there should be a central program to realize that. Next slide, please. Cuny as an institution in each campus should be seeking new investments to promote food security from the city, state, and federal government. And we think the new resources coming in as a result of COVID provide a stream of funding that could be used not just to address COVID, important as that is, but also to address some of the pre-existing problems that will be required if we want to make meaningful reductions. We also need to be sure that the resources that are now allocated and that will come in are equitably allocated so that all campuses have a level of resources proportionate to their need. And we also think that Cuny needs to make a much more systematic effort to evaluate and assess the impact of their food security program so that we can continue to make progress. Thank you so much, and I now turn it over to my dear colleague, Sara.
Hi, everyone.
Sarah, sorry,
Yes.
one moment before you get started. I just wanted to also invite folks who are attending this webinar to put comments in the chat if they have questions for Nick or Sarah or Jan or any of our responders. We're going to take some time towards the end to be able to answer some of those questions. So feel free to load up the chat with interesting questions, and we look forward to answering them. Back to Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, it's great to be here with you today. Patty, if you pass the screen share to me, I will share my screen. I'm going to do that. And as I get started, I just want to say what a pleasure it's been to work with Nick and his team on this, and how grateful we are to the Petri Foundation for the support. I think that some of you may be familiar with the Hope Center, but probably not all of you. We have spent about 20 years examining basic needs and security in higher education. We do a combination of things. We do applied research, but we also have a technical assistance program where we work directly with colleges and universities around the country to address these challenges. as well as working with policymakers on systems change. And we were really pleased and grateful when Cuny agreed to allow us to collect some data. It was now a couple of years ago. Nick shared some of it. It gives us the chance to take a look at basic needs in Cuny and also to put that into some comparison with the national picture. And so that's what I want to do now, is take a step back for a moment from what Nick just shared, which has to do with the very specific things that our two teams have discovered in the last year, and consider the broader context of the challenges that we face, which were in many ways the analytic framework that we used for looking at what Cuny did and did not have to offer when it came to food insecurity. And I think that one of the things that you'll see in my slides is that we think about the causes of campus food insecurity. We think about them in a multitude of ways. It's not that it just comes, let's say, from a student not buying enough meals on a meal plan. It's not nearly that simple, which means that if it's going to be addressed, it's going to require a more complex solution. And so I want to introduce to you all the concept of the new economics of college, something that I wrote a lot about in my book, Paying the Price. Now, there are 5 aspects to this, and you see all of them operating throughout Cuny. The first one, of course, and I don't think there's anybody on here who doesn't feel this quite strongly, that college prices are rising, and they're rising substantially, but we do need to acknowledge that the vast majority of those costs are the costs of basic needs, not the costs of tuition. Tuition gets a lot of attention. Tuition has gotten some attention, of course, in New York. You all have the Excelsior Scholarship Program, although I have to admit my team has many concerns about that program. But we need to attend to the fact that the cost of basic needs are rising faster than earnings. And so here I'm showing you data for New York City. It is from one of your colleagues' reports, and it shows you the extent to which the self-sufficiency standards are not being met, and that the wages that you would have to have in order to be self-sufficient and able to afford your basic needs in New York City are well above what the actual median earnings are. Of course, that was the case even before COVID. And so that's a very important issue that would have to be addressed. Secondly, and you saw some attention to this in what Nick was referring to, many of your students are deeply embedded in families as economic units. When the students' challenges are occurring, it's often the case that it's occurring for the full family. And especially for racial and ethnic minority families who've had a tough time surviving for a very long time, it's been important for the family to share resources as a whole unit. And so, for example, a student who has access to a bit of financial aid may very well find that they're faced with tough choices. They might want to spend it on their own food, but their younger brother and sister also have needs. And so when we look at the income inadequacy rate, in other words, what I showed you previously, the income falling short of the actual expenses in your city, and you look at that by race ethnicity, it becomes very clear who's much more likely to be in a family that is falling short. Now, of course, undergirding all of this is a serious issue of work simply not paying enough. And I think that one of the things that we must all grapple with, and of course, COVID makes this much more complicated, is that your students are already working. They're already receiving financial aid. They're already putting in a lot of effort, and they're still falling short on their basic needs. And we've got to admit that one of the ways to therefore address students' basic needs is to raise wages. And that as wages rise, students will be able to meet their own basic needs without having to turn to additional programs. Now, some of that Cuny is obviously not in charge of necessarily in a direct way. However, in indirect ways, it can play a very important role in advocating for changes that could lift the wages of all low-income people in New York, not only in Cuny. In addition, Cuny has decisions to make about what it pays to its own employees, including its students. And of course, at this moment in COVID, it's a particularly hard time to talk about that given the substantial rates of unemployment, but it is nonetheless a critical time to talk about this because there is massive inequality in the earnings of folks within the city itself. I would be remiss if I didn't next say that one of the main contributors to basic needs insecurity within Cuny is the fact that Cuny is inadequately funded. This chart shows you the college's operating support for the community colleges. The situation is worse there compared to the senior colleges, but it is not okay at the senior colleges either. Allocations of less than $3,000 per FTE from New York State contribute to these problems. The Hope Center released a report yesterday that will further show you why allocations based on FTE are part of the problem. FTE, rather than the use of headcount, treats part-time students as if they're less than full-time human beings. Allocations based on headcount would provide Cuny with the resources that it needs to educate every part-time student as well as full-time students, ensuring that their basic needs are met as well. But right now, based on the allocation, 2 or 3 or even 4 part-time students are treated as if they only have the basic needs of one full-time individual. Finally, we have to talk about the flaws in the safety net. The safety net has been failing college students for a long time, and we are seeing that in great detail right now during COVID. Just to speak of the most recent areas of challenges, there have been laudable efforts to expand the eligibility criteria during this pandemic and even before this pandemic. But in many ways, those advances have not occurred. For example, there are work requirements in place. At a time of massive unemployment, it would seem the moment to lift those work requirements, or at least to allow college to count as work. Many states appealed to the Federal Nutrition Services part of USDA to actually make that happen for college students, and their requests were flat out denied. To make matters worse, when the stimulus payments came down, a sizable number of students on the younger end of the spectrum were completely cut out of those payments, under the assumption that if their parents claimed them for tax purposes, they would reap those benefits. But as we know, those payments were hardly enough for the parents themselves, and many students, especially LGBTQ students, do not receive support from their parents because they are estranged from their families. These folks were left especially vulnerable. And finally, while it was amazing to see Congress pass a CARES Act that included $6.2 billion in emergency financial assistance for college students, something that should, according to Congress, have been shared with any student in need, irrespective of whether or not they can complete a FAFSA. Unfortunately, the Secretary of Education stepped in at the 11th hour and imposed rules and restrictions cutting out large numbers of CUNY students from support, making the process not only more onerous, but also saying that if you were, for example, undocumented, or you were estranged from your family and could not file FAFSA, you would not be eligible for that support. Now, that's the environment in which CUNY exists. Some of it is within its control, as I said, in a direct way. Some of it needs to be the work to be done by the government relations team, which needs to join forces with other public institutions across the state, including with SUNY, to create the necessary changes and increase pressure to do so. We have done surveys on this topic for 5 years nationally, and prior to that, for another decade in the state of Wisconsin. We have data collected from over 330,000 students at 400 plus institutions, including CUNY. I want to note that this spring, on week 4 of the pandemic, we put a COVID student survey into the field around the country. We have data collected from over 35,000 students, and we'll be reporting on those results on June 15th, so you can watch for that report. But I want to show you that the backdrop, the national backdrop of food insecurity and housing insecurity and homelessness, which is a key part of basic needs insecurity, that the national backdrop does look similar to what you were seeing here in New York. And so I do encourage everyone working on these issues in Cuny to not feel alone as they do so. And that includes the administrators. This is a problem that is absolutely a financial and a moral challenge for the City University of New York. But as you all seek solutions and work on these challenges, I hope you will appeal to the broader community of experts across the country, including practitioners who are themselves making headway on these problems because they share in your challenges. I thank you all so much for your time today. I'm looking forward to the further discussion.
Thank you so much, Sara. I'm going to turn it over to Jan to give us a bit of her perspective on some of these issues. Jan?
Everyone.
Jan, you're on mute. There you go.
So I see. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Well, welcome to all the attendees and the other participants in this seminar. When we were setting out to write the report that's being released today, I was asked to provide some perspective from the point of view of, how to put it, of 50 years of work on and within public policy advocacy around hunger and poverty in the United States, and particularly around the role of charitable provisions like soup kitchens and food pantries and food banks within the broader context of food assistance like school meals and SNAP and WIC. And so I've been asked to share some of the lessons from that history with this seminar. And I'm going to start by saying, beware of the seductions of food pantries. Food pantries are very appealing. You can see that 18 of 23 CUNY campuses have established a food pantry. A lot of that has been within the first couple of years. And food pantries are in some ways the first response that many people think of. Students are hungry, let's make some food available in an easy access way. They're relatively inexpensive to establish. They permit the engagement of all sectors of the community. Other students can be involved, faculty, administrators, outside partners. But food pantries do essentially nothing to address the underlying income shortfalls that Sara has documented, the ways in which college costs, including the meeting of basic needs, exceed the resources of so many of our families. And my concern about food pantries is not just that, okay, they're not enough. It's that sometimes they serve the function of making the well-fed among us feel better. Okay, people who donate to food pantries or help them get started feel like, okay, we've done our work, we've made this available, and now we can get on with the fundamental tasks of higher education. It's a sort of moral safety valve that makes us feel better and does not solve the problem. So while I'm glad that CUNY students have access to food pantries when they need them, I want to be very sure that we don't stop there. Any food pantry at CUNY, when CUNY is open and functioning, should also be a portal to other services, particularly to assistance in SNAP enrollment and to connecting with the earned income tax credits and subsidized childcare and all the things students need in order to make ends meet. When we do start food pantries or other programs, I think we need to look very carefully at the realities of particular campuses. We don't want to fall into a trap of fads. Oh, everyone's doing this or everyone's doing that. At CUNY, a food pantry that provides food for basic meal preparation at home may not really be useful for a lot of students. If they are traveling by subway and they have to haul their books and their computers back and forth, they don't have a lot of room in the backpack or muscle space to carry groceries home. They might be better served by a meal voucher or meal token for a meal on campus, or a free snack opportunity, and a referral to a food pantry in the community that is near their home. Okay, so we have hundreds of community-based food pantries in New York, and many of our students would be better served by a referral there. When we are building food pantries and other forms of assistance, I want to also say beware of overdoing investment in infrastructure. As I've watched the food banking movement in the United States institutionalize, when a decision was made to provide healthier food, many food banks turned immediately to fresh fruits and vegetables. But fresh fruits and vegetables pose logistical challenges that end up with huge capital investment, so that you have refrigerated truck fleets and you have drive-in freezers and coolers, and pretty soon you're creating a secondary food system for poor people that is in some ways a mirror of the food system that's out there. If you can help people access SNAP, they can do their shopping in the stores that are supplied by an infrastructure that already exists. So I really say, think twice before you go scurrying around for refrigerators and freezers and coolers. I personally don't want to see food pantries on campus be the norm long-term. The third thing I would say that's most important, I think, is to leverage public benefits within our package of assistance. Sara mentioned the barriers to SNAP use by students, and I think we need to address those in the public policy context. But meanwhile, many students do meet the eligibility criteria for SNAP, and they should be able to get skilled, efficient help with application. The SNAP application process is a notorious barrier to participation because it's cumbersome, it's complicated, it requires the photocopying or digital reproduction of many documents. And we need to have on our campus people who can help students do this. I'd like to see the numbers on single stop and food pantries the other way around. I wish we had 18 single stops and 7 food pantries. But in any case, we need to have on every campus some point of contact that assists students to obtain the benefits for which they are eligible. And then the other thing we need to do is address the barriers to eligibility. As Sara pointed out, it seems patently ridiculous to be enforcing work requirements at a time when unemployment is surging to levels comparable to the Great Depression. But I think the whole notion of work requirements in the programs that provide for basic needs to be rethought. You'll see some of Maggie Dickinson's work here at Cuny in the report, but in her recent book, she makes very clear that many people who work cannot document their work in ways that meet the requirements of a publicly administered work requirement. They're working, but they don't have the documentation to show it. I think now is the moment when many people are having experiences that increase their empathy for people in need, and when many people are facing an inability to work. Now is the moment for us to begin to remove work requirements from basic needs programs. There are better ways to motivate people to work, the main one being an adequate wage. And so I think we finally want to have our campuses involved in a robust way in campaigns for better food assistance, better income security in the United States. Sara mentioned the government relations team, and I think that's a really important place to speak up on behalf of our students and their families. But I also hope that we can engage students, that we can use the thing we're set up to do, which is to teach courses, teach students to harness their civic engagement to speak up on their own behalf. And we did that through a CUNY Food Security Advocates course that was offered at John Jay and at Hostess. And I'd like to see us be able to duplicate that in the future. And I'll add my voice of thanks to the Petri Fund for helping in doing that. I want to conclude with a note of hope, which is to say that Americans do care about hunger and food security. And there have been many points in the past when we have mobilized to demand that government do a better job. We did it with the school food programs, and we can do it with food assistance and income security help for students and their families. So I'll stop there. I didn't time it.
I think you're right on time. Thank you so much, Jan. I want to move now into the responders portion of today's meeting. But before I do, I just wanted to add another reminder about any questions that you have, please put them in the chat. Due to security concerns utilizing these sort of platforms, we've set up the chat so that if you put a response in, we'll be able to see it. But you can also send the response directly to Patricia Lamberson. Her name is in the participant list, and we're gathering up those questions and we'll be able to present them to the panel on the second portion of the meeting. So moving on to the responders portion, again, this is an opportunity to give a group of people who haven't been directly involved with putting together these reports some opportunity to respond to what they're hearing. And to lead off, I want to start with Cass from the Petri Foundation. If you could share some of your thoughts about what you've heard and what you think of this work and what do you think it means for the future of student food insecurity.
Thanks so much. I first just want to say thank you so much to all the folks who've already spoken, Nick and Jan and Sara, Patty, Craig, thank you. I think this piece of work that you all are sharing today is incredibly important, and I'm really feeling honored to be able to support some of the research and findings that you have done. I think it's really high quality work. As I think Nick and others have noted, the Carol and Milton Petri Foundation has been a supporter of student basic needs at CUNY for quite some time. Our foundation started by providing emergency grants or funds that colleges could use to make emergency grants to students. We've been doing that for close to 10 years at this point. And then in the last few years, we've also taken a deep interest in issues of hunger and food insecurity and have been working side by side with most of the campuses across the CUNY system to institute food pantries and other food assistance programs. So I just want to say, add my thanks really for highlighting the work that's going on here. And then to echo just a couple of things that came out in the recommendations from this research. First, I really believe, that there is tremendous work going on across the university and across the city around food security or food insecurity issues. But I appreciate the fact that the research calls out the need for even greater coordination, both thinking about a position at a central office level to think about these issues university-wide, but also to think about ways that CUNY, the central office, CUNY, the campuses can work in partnership with each other and with external organizations. I think there are a number of community-based organizations that are working on food security issues, and we want to create more and more opportunities for those organizations to collaborate. And in particular, I think there's a growing movement to connect the food access world to the food supply world. I know that farmers and food distributors in the state are really reeling right now from the disruptions that have happened because of COVID, and there's an opportunity to create even deeper and stronger partnerships there. And then I want to just echo, I think every one of the speakers so far has talked about the importance of moving beyond the emergency aid to really structural supports. And so I appreciate all the comments about SNAP and feel that SNAP and other public benefits have to be an enormous part of the solution here. I look for partners to help think about advocacy efforts to bring to normalize SNAP access, but also to help overcome some of the challenges that folks have highlighted in terms of getting more students eligible for SNAP. So I think those are really important issues to be thinking about as we move forward here.
Thank you so much, Cass. Deborah, I'm curious, what are your thoughts? And you're on mute still.
I just unmuted. Good morning. And it really is a pleasure for me to be here this morning. And thank you for the invitation. So, you know, I have to say that when I read the report, I found, of course, that it is extremely comprehensive and substantive. And the results is very representative of the issues that I've experienced over the past 11 years working at Bmcc for my students. In relation to, you know, to food insecurity and housing insecurity as a matter of that fact. And I love that the recommendations are you know, really geared toward helping us to stamp out food insecurity. So I can't wait to see some of the work that goes in around advocacy, as Cass and Sara and all the other speakers have spoken about. In relation to the campus perspective, what I'd like to do is really offer, you know, I think the report has done a tremendous job in giving a great synopsis of the single stop office and the work that we do on the campuses. I'd like to really focus in a little bit on the work that we have been doing in these difficult times, being remote from our students. And as you can imagine, we have to very quickly move to develop some infrastructure that would enable us to continue to communicate with our students. I mean, we know that they've been vulnerable prior to this pandemic, and they were even more so during these times. And so we incorporated a number of platforms to continue to work with them. Google Voice, for example, nothing that we have done in the past. We had to very quickly put in place Google Voice, and Zoom became our friends to communicate with our students. We have to figure out ways to get funds to our students in a very emergency manner, you know, and so we created a platform or a model where we can ensure that our students received funds as quickly as we possibly could. We compiled a comprehensive informational sheet so that we can get links to our students in relation to services such as unemployment and Department of Social Services. We knew that those would be some of the areas where our students would want to access services as quickly as possible. And of course, we're continuing to connect our students to healthcare and legal services. Those who have become unemployed also find themselves without health insurance. And so connecting them to our enrollers that we work with and in legal, for those who are experiencing issues with landlords, you know, we continue to make sure that they're getting the services in those areas. And, you know, and as a result, in this short period of time, we were really able to provide almost 400 of our students with over $188,000 in emergency funds. And, you know, that's actually, it's an excellent thing that we were able to do, but it's a drop in the bucket in relation to what the need is out there. And hundreds of students, of course, have been able to come through and take advantage of our food pantry. You know, in relation to the recommendations that have been made and that Dr. Nick and Sara spoke about, I mean, I think they're just on point. They're on point in terms of all of the things that need to be done to really stamp out food insecurity. The one that I would really like to drill down on in relation to SNAP is that the policy changes are absolutely necessary in terms of ensuring that some of the criteria is eliminated to make sure that our students can be eligible for SNAP. But I would like to see some advocacy around ensuring that students can use SNAP to purchase prepared hot meals. You know, we have a number of students who are in shelter systems that do not have cooking facilities, and they may actually have SNAP and can't use it, you know, to purchase a meal that would be hot. It'd be great if we can work toward those campuses, for example, that have cafeterias, for them to be able to purchase a hot meal with their SNAP benefits. I also, and I know I heard this mentioned earlier in terms of this population, I would really love to see us pay a little closer attention to a population that I really do respectfully call the invisible student, and that's our undocumented population. You know, I worry so much about them now because prior to this pandemic, prior to working remotely, very few would really come forward for all the fears that they experience in identifying themselves. And so now I don't know how to get to many of them. And it's troubling, you know, because they are probably, of all the vulnerable populations among our students, they are probably one of the, you know, the most vulnerable. And of course, our international students. I think some attention needs to be paid to how we address the need among our international students. You know, some are very far from their families, very far from home. They've come here to study, and they find themselves here with no supports. So, you know, I know, as Sara mentioned, the CARES Act came down and it benefited some of our students, and we're very happy and grateful for that. But there are some students who were not included in those awards, and it's just as troubling as she'd mentioned. And you know, and lastly, I just want to really take a moment to thank our funders, Petri Foundation, Lang Foundation. We have a number of private individuals, donors, who have given us monies towards our emergency fund. I really can't tell you, as a person who helps to process those funds, how important it is to have funders who are invested in ensuring that our students are taken care of. In these stressful times, you know, as I speak with our students on a daily basis, I hear the pain, and I hear the, you know, I hear the frustration, but I also hear the courage, and I also hear the strength in many of them, in spite of the challenges that they are experiencing. And I hope I have many of them on this, in this event today. And the one thing that I would really want them to know is that, you know, we love you very, very much, and we will continue to do everything that we can to make sure that you're okay. Sorry, I get a little emotional about my students. And that's it. Thank you all. Thank you for, you know, for having me on.
No problem. Thank you, Deborah. And it's absolutely understandable. It's a very emotional topic. So it's really, really beautiful to hear how passionate you are about helping your students, and they're fortunate to have someone like you in their corner. Next up, Timothy.
Hi, everyone. So greetings, good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for, you know, coming together and putting together this webinar. I mean, like, first I'd like to, you know, just thank, you know, Craig, and I'd like to thank all the professors, and also the members of, you know, both Health Cuny and also Hope. You know, I think that, like, all these different organizations, especially when they're coming together at such a trying time, like, you know, not only in our community in Cuny, but across our nation, where a lot of our college students are going to need some additional support. And I'm glad that this conversation is being had. You know, like I said earlier, my name is Timothy Hunter, the chairperson of the University Student Senate. And yeah, I seen the comments from City Tech. I've been trying to make it my mission to like, you know, promote like my school wherever we go. We're one of the, like, you know, lesser known CUNYs, so to speak. But like, you know, I'm glad that, you know, we can have this conversation that impacts so many of, you know, my student constituents across our university. USS has always stood by, like, you know, increasing, you know, the amount of food support services and just support services across the board, for all of our students in CUNY. I feel like, you know, that's something that we always overlook as a university. I mean, like, a lot of people, they assume that when you get to college that you automatically, like, you know, become like a grown adult, and you're able to kind of like provide for yourself, and you're able to kind of like work a full-time job while simultaneously going to school and maintaining like a lot of other aspects of your life. But as a lot of the speakers before highlighted, that it's just not that simple. And, you know, especially with the coronavirus outbreak and how, like, you know, we've been dealing with this pandemic and both the national and the state responses, we're seeing that at the end of the day, a lot of our students are going to end up getting the short end of the stick. There are a couple of parts in this report that stuck out to me, and I hope sticks out to everyone else when they get a chance to kind of go through it. I got a chance to go through some of it last night, and this morning, I know I'm in the middle of finals week, and a lot of the students are. So it's been very, very tough. But it's also like put a spotlight on me, to the students, and what they're going through right now. You know, and we already know, because we get the complaints, we get a lot of students that send us emails, we try to follow up, you know, about the rising costs of everything. But to read this report and know that almost like 3 times, like now more than ever, 3 times, like our students are 3 times more likely to like run out of food because of like lack of money, right? And that's due to, like, you know, our economy and you know, students not working right now. A lot of our students may have worked retail jobs or part-time jobs that may not be open due to, like, you know, us having to maintain social distancing, and that's something that isn't gonna like recover overnight, right? Like, you know, like jumpstarting the economy is gonna take a effort across the board. And I think that what I'm very, very worried about is that our national and our state government aren't focusing on education as being part of that reopening process. I mean, it's a phase, right? It's something that they're saying that they need to kind of like incorporate to bring people back to school and have classes on campus. But what they're not talking about is the investment in those student support services. And I think that the report goes on to highlight some of these student support services, like ASAP, which has proven time and time again to kind of build stronger relationships between the students and the administration and the staff members on campus, and allow for the students to tap into more of those resources that they need to be successful. You know, I think that like when we kind of buckle down and invest in programs like ASAP, like Single Stop, we kind of get rid of the stigma of the food pantry. And I think that it was Janet that kind of highlighted that the food pantries are not like the big fix, the Band-Aid fix for everything. It's the conversation starter that's needed to kind of like take our conversation around food insecurity to the next level, right? It creates awareness of the problem from like a community standpoint, and allows us to kind of come in and figure out how we can kind of integrate some sort of policy here that helps students across the board, because the food pantry is just one aspect of it. We're also talking about like SNAP benefits, right? Like we want to be able to let students know that we have food for them, that they can also get like, you know, unemployment help. They could also get like other assistance programs. And like, you know, that even when we do decide to buckle down and like, you know, invest more in Single Stop and things like that, there's still so much other barriers for when it comes to our international students and our undocumented students. And I think a lot of that also comes with us trying to just change the narrative. I mean, the federal government and the state government play such a huge role in everything that we're trying to do to fight food insecurity. CUNY can do some things, and I'll get to that very soon. But when it comes down to that, I think that like now is the time where we start talking to our students about voting. Now is the time where we start talking to our students about the census. Like letting them know that there are opportunities here that can provide these resources, give us the representation at the federal level, get us more civically engaged in this process of like, you know, like combating food insecurity, because higher education is fought at that level. And I think students and, you know, we need to be united and take the fight to that level. And that's what we've been doing. We're going to be spending the whole summer doing a lot of census work. We're going to be spending the next couple months like, of course, like, you know, fighting tuition hikes, but at the same time, also encouraging students to like, you know, fill out the absentee ballots and get more civically engaged, because that's where this fight is being taken. And I think that like one thing that I can say we strongly support on the CUNY side of things, again, food pantries is one fix, but it's going to take more than just the report for CUNY to recalibrate its approach to food insecurity. There needs to be a more seamless process for us to work with outside nonprofit organizations, the farmers and other groups that we kind of spoke about before. And also there needs to be like a team that is like brainstorming constantly, because this landscape is so ever changing. Needs to be brainstorming like ways that we can work together to make sure that, like, you know, food insecurity is like, you know, the food insecurity is non-existent at our CUNY schools. And I know that's very ambitious. So a lot of people say, well, it can never happen. But I believe that, like, you know, we can have a CUNY that is a true vehicle of upward social mobility for our students. And that starts with us making sure, you know, the very basic level of needs are being met, right? Our students have a home, that they have to, like, you know, nothing else to worry about but their academics, maybe a job if that's what they need. And I think that it's super, super important that we're being supportive of our students during this time. And I think something like a working group or a task force being created, with, of course, student input, which I want to, like, you know, shout out to Patricia and everybody else that reached out to us, you know, to get Professor Freudenberg, like to get that student support and that student input, because that's going to be the most important part of all of this, making sure that the students are included in the process. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm definitely down to answer any questions at all. So thank you for all the hard work that you all are doing on behalf of the students. And Deborah, like, it's okay to get emotional. You know, we're here for you as well. And thank you for that.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Tim. Last but not least, Carla, your thoughts.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for this report and for your insights. The report was very comprehensive and really echoes the student voice and what we go through on our day-to-day when we're dealing with food and school. First, I would like to highlight one of the recommendations that Nick proposed, which is creating a food security advocacy task force. I think that is very important because, as we saw in the report, students still don't know the resources we have available on campus. And while we are trying to gather more resources and specialize what we do have, it is important that they know what we have available so that we don't have students going hungry on campus when we do have food for them, and also single staff offices in some of the campuses. I also wanted to highlight what Jan said about food pantries not being the sole answer to all of our problems, because they really are like Band-Aids. And so it is important that we have single staff offices on all of our campuses, because they're not just a food pantry. There we can find, we can fill out our taxes, we have the food pantry, they can apply for SNAP, legal services. So that is very important, so students know that they can have a place inside the school where they can find all the resources they need. Also, one of the resources that was not listed on the report is resource guides. I think I always advocate for resource guides because we have a lot of students that are homeless and undocumented, and sometimes after they graduate, they don't have access to our food pantries anymore or single staff because they are only for current CUNY students. So when they graduate, it's like we abandon them and they have nowhere to go or don't have the resources or don't know where to find them. So a resource guide for students that are currently at CUNY and students that graduate will be good, so we can move on from only the pantry choice that we have to a more holistic approach when we approach food insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Really thoughtful responses. And I think, you know, your engagement with this issue really helps provide some context for those of us, including myself, even though with the Institute, I work on this issue, to hear directly from people who are involved in different aspects of this and our concern from different aspects is always really, really good to hear. I want to take this time to move into our question and answer phase. We have a lot of questions coming in. I'm in the process of filtering through them. But before we jump directly into that, I want to give a moment to allow our colleague, Maggie Dickinson, who is on the line here, to talk a little bit about her work looking at SNAP and how it relates to this issue. And Maggie, I see you now. Feel free to unmute whenever you're ready. There you go.
There we go. I think you had to unmute me. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the work on this report. I think it's great. I think it's great that everyone is, that this group has come together. I'm especially happy to see students and folks from single stop offices. So I'm Maggie Dickinson. I teach at Gutman Community College. And I'm also doing some research on understanding the barriers that students face in applying for SNAP, because one of the things that we know is that college students apply for and receive SNAP at lower levels than people in the general population. And so we're doing this study to try to understand some of those issues a little bit better. At Cuny, it's a mixed method study. We did a big survey, and then I was also able over the past few weeks to do telephone interviews with a number of students. And so I just wanted to talk briefly about, and it echoes a lot of what's been said already today, but a little bit about what we found. So we found that about 20% of Cuny households, Cuny students are enrolled in SNAP, and about 56% of those are enrolled as part of a household. And so going back to a little bit of what Sara was talking about, one of the things that becomes very clear is that students' lives are complicated, especially at Cuny. It's largely a commuter school. A lot of our students live with families and are not just financially dependent, but are also financial contributors to the households where they live. And so when we were talking to students who don't get SNAP, because that's really the main question we're trying to understand, what became clear is that there are sort of three major reasons why students aren't receiving SNAP. One is because they're not financially eligible. And although that seems straightforward, I don't think it's quite as clear as it seems, because many students who were food insecure and would have benefited from SNAP were not eligible because they were counted as part of their household, even though they themselves may not eat at home very much, operate pretty much independently. And so there are these complicated relationships within the household dynamic where students who really would benefit are not getting SNAP benefits. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of confusion about those questions. The other big one are the work requirements for students. And what we heard in our interviews was often that students feel punished for being full-time students when they get turned down because they're not meeting those work requirements that are applied to full-time students. And so I just want to echo again things that other people said, that especially in this moment, but even before this, the idea of requiring people to work in order to get food assistance is just bad policy, and it's especially bad for students. And this is a place where I think Cuny and the leadership at Cuny has a real role to play in advocating for overturning those particular barriers to SNAP for our students and for students across the country. And then the last thing are the bureaucratic challenges that students face in applying for SNAP. Not knowing how, feeling confused, starting the process and getting discouraged, maybe because of the treatment or the process. And this is a place where I think investment in single stop really matters. Having a guide, having assistance in that very complicated and confusing process, I think is a place where Cuny could make a real difference in helping our students access the benefits that they need. And I'll say also, Deborah, the point that you brought up was something I heard over and over again from students in these interviews. We know our students lead challenging lives. We live in New York City. A commute to campus can take an hour and a half. You know, students might be on the train 3 hours a day, plus school, plus studying, plus work, plus family obligations. And many of them don't have time to cook and eat. The idea of them being able to eat on campus, to be able to buy food with SNAP on campus, I think is a terrific idea and something that was echoed by many of the students that we talk to. So I'll leave it there. But just again, I appreciate the work everyone's doing and looking forward to moving forward with all of you on this work.
Great. Thank you so much, Maggie. So let's jump into some of the questions. The first question is directed at Nick and Sara and Jan, and it's from Rona Shermy from the Jewish Foundation for the Education of Women. And what Rona wants to know is, could you provide your top 3 priorities for philanthropic funding in moving the needle in issues related to campus food insecurity in 2020 and 2021?
I'm going to let Nick go first. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll start and then turn to my colleagues. First of all, a shout out to Jewish Foundation for the Education of Women. They supported the Food Security Advocates Program at John Jay and Hostess Community College that Carla and Jan talked about, and we really learned so much from that. And I think there are 3 priorities. One is we believe that a CUNY-wide, perhaps citywide campaign to enroll all eligible college students in SNAP is a really important priority and would put, an additional hundreds of thousands, perhaps more dollars into students' pockets to enable them to buy food. At the national level, a study by the Government Accountability Office found that the rates of enrollment among college students who are financially eligible for SNAP but not enrolled because of the restrictions are much lower for the general population. So CUNY, even with the restrictions, I hope we can move out of some of those in the time of COVID. We then need to make sure that every student who's eligible is able to get through those hurdles Maggie was talking about. Second, we haven't talked so much. I think CUNY has an opportunity, and I think philanthropy would really help to spark that opportunity to rethink how we do food services. Food services on most campuses are seen by college administrators as a revenue stream. And I understand, as we're being starved by the city, state, and federal governments for resources in not just CUNY, but all public higher education, a revenue stream that doesn't have so many strings attached to it, like what comes in from food, looks pretty attractive. But the food that's available can either contribute to or make it harder for our students to succeed academically. And at CUNY, we should be rethinking how we use food services, not so much to bring in revenues, but to support academic success by making healthy food available and affordable to more students. And seeding that work with vouchers, subsidies, would really be an important step forward. And finally, I think for the ultimate funders of food security services at public institutions have to be city, state, and national government. College students need to be able to eat in order to produce value for themselves and for society. CUNY moves more people into the middle class than all the Ivy Leagues, Stanford, MIT combined. And for us to be able to achieve that potential, our students need to be able to be confident that they can get a meal. And so creating the advocacy that will convince the governor, the state legislature, the mayor, and the city council to provide CUNY and SUNY with the resources they need to ensure that our students can focus on their schoolwork would be an important step. That's my thought.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with everything Nick just said. I do want to underline the importance of advocacy here. I think that New York City needs to have a broad coalition, and someone needs to be in charge of building that to expand the supports from basic needs, both in K-12 and through higher education. I don't think educational attainment is going to happen for New York students without those basic needs supports. And I think that, frankly, the private sector needs to be part of that that effort as well, especially on the advocacy piece with the state. The other thing I would just emphasize, especially at this incredible moment in time, is I continue to believe that an investment in emergency aid is critical. The efficient and equitable delivery of emergency aid is a major challenge, but it is a challenge that I know that CUNY is in the midst of working to confront. But filling in those gaps left by the CARES dollars and helping with the dollars that will be needed, because of course the CARES dollars will be gone in a moment, and this pandemic is ongoing, I continue to say that absolutely must happen.
Okay, and this is Jan, and I would just chime in. I agree with everything that both Nick and Sara said. And then I think there is also a role for broad public education. Sara, I was very struck when you reported what had happened with the CARES Act and the Secretary of Education and that intervention. And I'm thinking about how many people don't know that and don't know that students who are very much in need were excluded from assistance. So I think we have a big public education task that we need to do in forums like this and in reports, but also through our students themselves by creating a curriculum that equips them to address these public policy issues. So I want to thank the Jewish Fund again for sponsoring our Campus Food Security Advocates project, and I would love to see replication of that project on other campuses.
I agree. May I just add one thing really quickly? 2 states, California and Washington State, have filed lawsuit in federal court against Secretary DeVos for that action because it cut out so many of their students. In the California community colleges, it's estimated it cut out 1 in 2 students. It would be perfect for New York to join that suit. It would be so important because so many of your students were cut out. And public pressure to either get, whether it's the CUNY chancellor, I'm not sure if that's the right person, that was who it was in California, or whether it's the state's attorney general to file suit, would definitely be supportive in this regard.
Thank you. Another question, and this one, I'm not seeing a name connected with it, so my apologies for not attributing it. And this was directed towards Tim, but I think for any of you who have direct experience with what's going on with food pantries on campuses now, if you would respond to this, do you feel that college campuses and CUNY in particular have communicated in a timely fashion and informed students regarding the hours food pantries will be open? And if not, what should colleges and CUNY do differently to reach students?
Can I take it?
Yes, go ahead,
Yeah.
Deborah.
So thank you for the question. So at BMCC, we've posted our hours and our operation, the single stop services, particularly the pantry, on all of our sites. On our website, we have a single stop page. When we are on the campus, we are we're promoting the service through flyering. We're utilizing work study students in some instances, you know, to go to the various areas. We're leaving information at all of the departments. So we're really trying to get to the students to inform them about the pantry. In addition to that, we go into the classrooms when we can. Now we're remote, so of course we're doing things a little differently, but when we're on the campus, we go into the classrooms and we do speak with the students. Our faculty are tremendous in terms of you know, allowing us to come in and talk with them, informing them about the services. So we try our best to get the information out to the students as much as possible. We also send out, our VP Craig sends out an email at the beginning of the semester and throughout the semester reminding students that they can come and take advantage of the services at the pantry. We've recently moved to having tours, so many of our partners, our faculty partners, bring their classes down and they're able to see the pantry, to see the operation, to see the types of items that we have in there. And I'm sure that, you know, there are many other things that we can continue to do, and we will always continue to explore all of the avenues. Being remote, we've been sending out emails to our students to invite them to come in. Of course, with all of the restrictions with social distancing and everything, it's now moved on appointment base, but we're still able to reach a number of students. I am toying with the idea and have talked a little bit with my Vice President about a model that Hunter College has, which is the mobile pantry, because I think we can identify where the bulk of our students are in the community, and in times like this, be able to go out to those who can't make it to the campus. We recognize that at times students have to take away bags and bags of food that's really very heavy. We don't only give to the student, we go into the family as much as we can, and up to maybe 3 family members if the student has children. So, or even brothers or sisters, whomever's in the home, we also try to feed as they access the food. So we do our best to get to as many of the students as we can, but someone said it before that, they would love to see a lot more commitment in terms of staff paid to the single stop office so that we can get to even more students. And I think that that's a really important point. But as much as we can, we utilize every avenue we can to try to get to our students.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else want to respond to that question?
I wanted to say that in the case of Hostess, students do get to know the hours that we work because it's on every flyer, and the people that do student outreach know the hours and they communicate that to the students. But the single stop office closes at 6. And we have a lot of nighttime students, so they don't have access to any of those resources that we have on campus. So that's a part of the Cuny campus community that is being left out of the resources that we do have because of lack of staffing and funding.
Great.
I have one thing I'd like to say. I mean, I think that when it comes to the opening of the pantries, I think that what was highlighted with the mobile pantries and then also kind of like extending for more staff, I think that's definitely helpful. I mean, one thing that I've pitched is that you have Cuny students that may attend Hostess but live in Brooklyn, or you have Cuny students that may live in Staten Island, but take classes at Brooklyn College. And I think that if there's any way for us to we already have local schools that are offering food and support services. Maybe Cuny should start looking at trying to open up to Cuny students within that live in the borough. I think if we can convert our already existing food pantries, of course by appointment right now while we're maintaining social distancing, but to students that live in the boroughs, it saves them the train trip all the way to their campuses, which could expose them to a lot of other public health concerns during this time. So I think that's just another thing that's considered, and there's a lot of options there.
Great. Thank you, Tim. So we're going to take one last question and then close out the event. And this one is from Monica Rodriguez. And what Monica says is, when distributing direct student aid through the CARES Act, what are some of the equitable approaches to the especially large communities that are served by Cuny that should be taken into account?
I'll note that, especially in the interest of time, that the Hope Center has on its COVID page. So if you go to hope4college.com, the number 4, on its COVID page, we have an entire guide to the equitable distribution of CARES dollars. We also have a separate guide to the equitable distribution of emergency aid dollars beyond the CARES Act. This is something that it is absolutely important to do well, and there are a number of decisions that can be very well intentioned, but unfortunately cut out many communities. So I appreciate you taking a look.
Great. Anyone else? All right. So again, thank you, everyone, both the presenters, the folks who responded. I want to take a few minutes to allow Nick and Sara to give some closing remarks, and then we'll wrap things up.
Sara, you start.
Sorry, you caught me by surprise there.
Sorry.
All right, no problem. Well, everyone,
You're used to it, though.
It's been great to be with all of you today. Let me just say, I think that the report explains in greater detail some of what I know everyone on the ground has been aware of for a long time. I think it is not uncommon to have these gaps in services, to have the silos, et cetera. But I think that the urgency of the need here to fix those things is accelerating. So I think it's time, and it's important to take the knowledge and the goodwill and the understanding that basic needs insecurity drives college non-completion, to take that and use it to propel action. And I really hope that what will happen next is a series of cross-CUNY collaborative opportunities to formulate action plans. And I do think the planning is important, but I also think it is important that there is an accelerated timeline to on-the-ground action. We cannot pretend like students are not experiencing educational disruptions right at this very moment, that they will continue experiencing them over the summer, and that it will be difficult to maintain enrollment in the fall if these supports are not dramatically increased by that time. Nick?
Thank you. And also thanks to all of you for participating in this, and we look forward to your working with us. I want to close with two thoughts. First, I think food security is an academic issue. The central mission of CUNY is to educate the young people of New York, the young and not so young. And in doing that, we contribute to the economy, to the health, to the social cohesion of New York City. And yet, although we've made progress in the last several years, only about half of the people who enter CUNY actually graduate. And one reason for that is food insecurity. And if we did a better job in promoting the food security and meeting the other basic needs of our students, we could bring much more value to New York City. And that's why it's in the interests of taxpayers, voters, parents, CUNY, philanthropy, to ensure that CUNY does a better job. The second point I want to leave is around the special circumstances of COVID. And I think the models that we've developed so far are certainly need to be expanded and developed in the as we're adjusting to COVID, but beyond that as well. For example, New York City has a wealth of health, food security, and other organizations. And we in CUNY have not done a very good job of systematically connecting our students to community resources. And as long as our campuses are closed, I think the direction of our efforts has to be helping students find help in the neighborhood, in their own neighborhoods. And we think that we can do a much better job at that. And we look forward to partnering with student services, with campuses, with student organizations to help students find the food security, the mental health, the healthcare, the sexual and reproductive health, and other services they need to succeed in life and to succeed in school. And we really look forward to working with many of you to make those things happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. And again, thank you everyone who participated in this really informative meeting. And thank you for everyone who attended. both Sara and Patty put some great resources in the chat. We can aggregate those and send them out to everyone who's attending the meeting. And additionally, if you have any questions, comments, or anything you want to discuss related to today's topic, feel free to reach out to the Institute, and we'd be happy to answer your questions or provide any sort of help that we can. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.